My son-in-law looked at the spot above the stove with mild disappointment and said, "The tile's getting greasy again." Like he was filing a complaint with management, and I realized I'd been managing this house for 4 months without ever agreeing to take the job. My name is Walter Brennan. I'm 61 years old, and 10 months ago, my daughter told me, in the same tone she used to use when she wanted me to pick her up from soccer practice, that either I cooked dinner for her husband's clients, or I should think about staying somewhere else for a while. I didn't yell. I didn't even argue. I went to my room, opened the suitcase I'd never fully unpacked, and folded my shirts the way I always do. Sleeves first, collar last. The next morning I left before the sun was all the way up. 8 days later, my phone had 31 missed calls on it. Before any of that, let me take you back to March, the day I carried 2 suitcases and a banker's box of photographs into my daughter's house in Lakewood, Ohio. I'd spent 31 years working logistics for a freight company out of Cleveland, the last 11 of them as a regional dispatch manager, which is a fancy way of saying I spent my life making sure other people's schedules worked out. I retired the year my wife Donna got sick. We had 2 good years after the diagnosis, then we didn't. She passed in the spring 2 years ago, in the bedroom of the house we'd owned on Larchmont Avenue for 26 years, with her hand in mine and the radio playing low, because she liked the sound of voices, even when she wasn't strong enough to listen to the words. I sold that house 7 weeks before I moved to Lakewood. The garage where her bicycle still hung from a hook, the kitchen where she'd burned exactly 1 pot roast in our whole marriage, and never let me forget that I'd burned 3. I told myself I was being practical. A man alone in a 4-bedroom house is just heating rooms nobody uses. My daughter Jenna called me on a Tuesday in February. "Dad, come stay with us. The house is too big for you to be alone in it. We've got the space." Her voice had that warmth I remembered from when she was small and wanted something from me, though I didn't let myself think that at the time. I told myself it was an invitation, a daughter wanting her father close. I'd raised her to be generous, and here was the proof. Her husband, Cole, met me in the driveway with a handshake that had clearly been practiced in a mirror somewhere. "Walter, glad you're here. You'll be comfortable, I promise." Jenna showed me to the room at the end of the hall, smallest of the 4 bedrooms, right off the kitchen. Cole stood in the doorway behind us and said pleasantly, "Actually works out well. You're close to everything." I smiled and nodded. I thought he meant convenient for me. It took me 3 months to understand he meant convenient for them. The first week, I made breakfast because I was up anyway. 31 years of 5 a.m. shifts doesn't leave a man easily. Jenna had an early meeting at the marketing firm where she worked and was out the door by 6:15. I scrambled some eggs, put out toast, made coffee because the kitchen was right there and I knew what to do with one. Cole came down at 6:40, looked at the plate, sat, ate, said nothing until he was halfway out the door. "Good eggs," he said. Then he was gone. The next morning he came down at the same time, looked at the stove, looked at me. I made eggs again. There was no conversation where I agreed to this. It simply became the shape of the morning, the way water finds the low part of a yard. By the second week it was assumed the way the sunrise is assumed. Nobody asked. Nobody thanked me past that first morning. I told myself this was what family did for each other, and some part of me, the part that had spent a career being useful to people who depended on me, liked having somewhere to put that energy. One afternoon, Jenna leaned in the kitchen doorway and watched me at the stove for a minute. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Dad," she said, smiling, and I let that warm me more than it should have. Donna's voice came to me that night, the way it sometimes still does. The ones who need you most are usually the ones who'll use you fastest. I told myself that wasn't fair. Jenna had always had a generous heart. I just hadn't seen yet what marriage to Cole had done to the shape of it. The first Saturday, Cole had people over to watch a football game. Jenna knocked on my door around 11. "Dad, could you throw together some snacks?" Just a few of Cole's coworkers. I made a spread, chili, sliders, a vegetable tray, the kind of thing I used to make when Donna and I hosted the neighborhood for the holidays. 3 people turned into 9. I kept refilling bowls from the pantry, working fast, the way I used to manage a loading dock under deadline. From the kitchen I heard the game, the laughing, the easy rhythm of men who'd known each other a while. The kind of afternoon I hadn't had myself in 2 years. One of Cole's friends wandered into the kitchen doorway, beer in hand, looking at the spread. "Man, who made all this?" Cole's voice, proud and easy. "That's my father-in-law. Guy loves to cook." I was standing 3 feet away. He didn't look at me when he said it. He loves to cook. Not he helped me out, not I asked him to. Just a fact about my personality, filed and closed. No debt owed, no thanks required. I stood at the sink, scrubbing a pan, and let that sentence sit in me like a stone. That night, I called my friend Roy, a man I'd worked dispatch with for 2 decades, the kind of friend who doesn't need much explaining to. Maybe I'm reading into it, I told him. Roy was quiet a second. Walt, you spent 30 years reading truck drivers who were lying to you about their hours. You know when something's off. I told him I'd give it time. That family takes adjustment. That was my first real mistake. By the second month, laundry joined the rotation. I noticed it the way you notice a draft before you find the open window. One Wednesday, Cole's dress shirts were folded on the dryer, clearly his own work. The Wednesday after that, a pile of his clothes was sitting outside my bedroom door. No note, no ask. Just sitting there like a delivery. I washed them. Old habit, I told myself. The same muscle that makes you check the mailbox out of routine. The pile came back the next Wednesday, and the one after. There's something particular about doing another grown man's laundry without ever being asked. No conversation, no acknowledgement, just an assumption left on the floor like it had always belonged there. The Wednesday after that, I signed up for a fly fishing club that met at the reservoir. Something I'd wanted to get back to since before Donna got sick. The first week I went, and it was good. 5 other retired guys, the smell of the water, nobody needing anything from me for 2 hours. I drove home lighter than I'd felt in weeks. The second week, Jenna caught me at the door at 5:30. You're heading out? To the club, yeah, like last week. Cole's got a client call running long. He'll need dinner around 7. I looked at her. He's a grown man, Jenna. He can make a sandwich. Dad, please, I'm slammed. I put my tackle bag down. I never went back. A few days after that, Cole stood in the kitchen doorway while I wiped the counter and looked at the backsplash with that same mild displeasure. Counters looking a little grimy by the stove. Not a question, not a request. A report filed with the appropriate department. I'd spent 31 years dealing with men who thought a dispatch office worked for them personally instead of with them. And I knew that particular tone the second I heard it. I turned back to the sponge and said nothing. Jenna, I thought. Where are you in all this? But she was always at work, or on her phone, or telling me she was slammed, and somewhere along the way, always available, had quietly turned into always responsible. Cole's mother, Sandra, came to visit in late September. 66 years old, cheerful, drove 3 hours with an apple pie balanced on the passenger seat. She hugged Cole the way mothers hug sons they haven't seen in months, both arms, eyes shut. She admired the house, admired the backyard, admired me, in the vague way people admire furniture that's doing its job well. Over dinner she mentioned, unprompted, that Cole grew up in a house where the meal was always ready. He never had to think about it, she said warmly. I just took care of it, made me feel needed. She smiled at me down the table. I smiled back, because what else do you do? Later through the wall I heard Cole's voice, low, not quite careful enough. Mom never complained about any of it. Instead it made her feel like she belonged. He wasn't on the phone. Jenna was right there with him. I kept washing dishes and understood exactly what he was doing. Setting a standard, holding his mother up as the correct shape for the role, letting me know I was the unfinished version of it. The next day I found Jenna in the laundry room and asked her straight out, Jenna, do you think I'm doing too much around here? She frowned like the question didn't parse. What do you mean? Cole's never been rude to you. That was her whole defense. No rudeness, therefore no problem. I thought about the pile of shirts. The fishing rod I never took out again. The 9 men I'd fed and never been introduced to. None of it had required a single raised voice. That Saturday I didn't make breakfast. Made coffee for myself, sat in my room with a book. Cole came down, opened the fridge, stood there a second, shut it, said nothing. But something in how he looked at me after that morning had changed, gone flatter, more accounting than affection. I picked a quiet Thursday, Cole at a work dinner, Jenna home early for once, and asked her to sit with me at the table. I don't mind helping, I told her. You know I don't, but I'd like to be asked before things get added to my week. I'd like to be consulted. She got that guarded look people get when they expect to be accused of something. Has Cole said something to upset you? No. He's told me more than once how much he appreciates having me around. I'm sure he does, I said, and she heard the edge in it. Her face shifted. Dad, I don't understand what you're asking. You're not staff, you're family. I held that word a second. Family who sleeps in the smallest room because it's near the kitchen. Family who skipped his fishing club so dinner would be on time. Family who washes another man's clothes because they show up on the floor without comment. You're right, I said. I am family. I let the silence carry the rest. She picked her phone back up. Conversation over. That night, I lay in the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling. The suitcase was still under the frame. I'd never bought a dresser, kept telling myself I would. Some part of me had simply never unpacked all the way, had known something before the rest of me caught up. For the first time, I let myself think seriously about leaving. But I'd sold the house. There was nowhere obvious to go. That was the thought that kept me there. Not love exactly, not even duty, just the weight of an irreversible decision, and underneath it, the stubborn hope that I was wrong about all of it. Cole's promotion came on a Tuesday. He walked in at 6, wearing the face of a man who'd rehearsed his own entrance. Senior account director, the title he'd been chasing 2 years, a real raise, an office with a window. Jenna threw her arms around him right there in the kitchen, genuinely happy, the kind of joy that belongs to people who actually love each other. And watching my daughter love someone the way I'd once hoped she would. I felt something true and complicated at the same time. Cole wanted to celebrate with a dinner party. The following Saturday, 14 people, his firm's partners, his new boss, a few close friends, a real showing. Jenna turned to me before she'd even finished the sentence. Dad, you'll help with the food, right? You're the best cook we know. I set the dish towel down. Help how? Plan it, or do all of it myself. She blinked. Cook it, obviously. And will I be sitting down to eat with everyone? Something crossed her face. Not quite guilt, more like the look of a person hearing an arrangement said out loud for the first time. It's mostly Cole's partners. It might be a little awkward. Awkward. I picked the towel back up. Sure, I said. I'll help. But something in me had already shifted, quiet and final, the way things do at the end of a very long patience. The menu came by text Monday, 7 dishes, clearly Cole's formatting, bulleted, no room to negotiate. Herb-crusted prime rib, garlic mashed potatoes, haricots verts, a scratch Caesar, shrimp cocktail to start, a cheese course, tiramisus for dessert. I wasn't asked what I could make in the time given, or whether 7 courses for 14 people was a reasonable ask of one man working alone. I was informed of the outcome and left to produce it. Tuesday, a note came through Jenna. Tell your dad Cole's new boss loves a good bourbon glaze on salmon, if he can work it in. Cole knew his boss's favorite dish. He never once asked whether I'd made it before. As it happened, I had. Donna used to request it every Christmas, but that wasn't the point. Wednesday, Jenna appeared in my doorway, with a request delivered in the careful, cheerful voice people use when asking a very large favor, while pretending it's nothing. Dad, would it be easier if you just stayed back in the kitchen during the party? You know, to manage things as they come up. Easier for who? I asked. She smoothed a wrinkle out of her sleeve that wasn't there. It'd just flow better. Cole's partners don't really know you. I looked at my daughter, the one I'd taught to ride a bike on Larchmont Avenue, the one I'd sat in the rain for at her college graduation and never once thought about leaving early. And now I was being asked to stay invisible in a house where I cooked 3 meals a day. I understand, I said. But I was already counting. 7 dishes, 14 place settings to wash after, 1 man doing all of it, 0 seats at that table. Thursday night, after they'd gone to bed, I sat in my room with the lamp low. The suitcase was still under the bed frame. I'd walked past the furniture store on Detroit Avenue 3 separate times and never gone in. Some stubborn part of me had known something for a while, and just hadn't said it out loud yet. I called my older daughter, Paige. She's a hospice nurse in Columbus, answers every call on the second ring like it might be the one that matters. I told her everything, the laundry, the fishing club, the word awkward. She was quiet a moment. Dad, you want me to call Jenna? No. I need to handle this myself. A pause. Dad, you know my guest room's just sitting there. She said it the way Jenna had said, come live with us. But it landed completely differently because it didn't come with a menu attached. After I hung up, I opened a browser and looked at rentals in Lakewood. Studios, 1 bedrooms, the kind of small space where the only dishes in the sink are yours. My pension covered it. It had always covered it. I just never let myself think past the assumption that I was supposed to be here. That was the night I stopped telling myself I had no choice. I want to ask you something, and I mean it. Have you ever caught yourself saying just a little longer, and then realized you'd been saying it for months? Tell me in the comments, and if anything in this is hitting close, send it to someone who might need to hear it tonight. Roy called me Wednesday morning, 3 days before the party. He'd driven up from Cleveland to see his grandson, and asked if I wanted to grab coffee Thursday. We sat in a diner booth on Detroit Avenue for almost 2 hours. I told him everything I hadn't said out loud, not just the facts, but the feeling under them, the particular loneliness of a man who spent his whole life being useful to people he loved, now being useful to people who couldn't tell the difference. Roy listened the way he always had, no interrupting, no fixing. When I finished, he set his coffee down. Walt, you are not the help, you're her father. Simple sentence. Those are usually the ones that land. We were still talking when Jenna pulled up to get me. She'd insisted on driving, said she had errands nearby. She came in for 5 minutes, bright and warm, and Roy liked her immediately, the way people always did. On her way out, she turned to him. Roy, you free Saturday? We're doing a little dinner thing. Cole just got promoted. Roy glanced at me, just a beat. I gave him the smallest nod. I'd love that, he said. In the car, Jenna talked about the flowers, the tablecloth she'd borrowed from a neighbor. She had no idea she'd just invited the one man in Lakewood who knew exactly what had been happening in her house for 4 months. Friday night, I was in the kitchen at 9, going through the pantry. Beef stock, check. The salmon was already curing in the fridge. I had the whole 7-dish timeline mapped on a legal pad. What could be prepped tonight, what needed the morning, what had to be plated last. 31 years of running a dispatch floor had made me good at exactly this kind of operation, alone, under pressure. Jenna came in quietly. Cole wasn't home yet, some last-minute drinks with the team. She stood near the island and didn't say anything for a second, which wasn't like her. Dad, she finally said, tomorrow's a big night for Cole. Careful, rehearsed. I need it to go smoothly. That means I need you in the kitchen. Just the kitchen. Don't come out, don't talk to people. I set down my pen. Jenna, what are you saying? She still wasn't quite meeting my eyes. If that's going to be too much for you, maybe it'd be easier if you stayed somewhere else this weekend. Took a little break. She'd wrapped it up like a kindness, like she was doing me a favor. I looked at my daughter for a long moment, 35 years old, standing in her own kitchen, telling her father to either work in silence or disappear, and finding a way to make it sound like concern. I turned off the burner under the stock. All right, I said. I understand. I walked down the hall and closed my door. At 11, I pulled the suitcase out from under the bed. I didn't throw it on the mattress. I opened it the way I had the day I arrived. Flat, both hands, unzipped all the way around. I packed the way I always do. Folded, not stuffed. Books in their own section. The framed photo of Donna wrapped in a sweater so it wouldn't crack. Donna used to say I could be ready to leave anywhere in 20 minutes. I never thought I'd actually need that. Some things I left behind. The gray apron I'd bought at the kitchen store on Detroit Avenue my second week. I hung it back on its hook by the stove, where it had always lived. The spare house key Jenna had given me, I set on the counter, and a folded sheet of paper on the cutting board. I'd thought hard about what to write. Not a speech, not an accusation, one sentence. I cooked because I loved you, not because I owed you. I hope tomorrow goes exactly how Cole wants it to. At 11:30 I called Paige. She picked up before the first ring finished. Dad, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm leaving in the morning. Can you find me a place close by? A beat. Already on it. Text me when you're in the car. That was Paige. No drama, no third degree, just trust. I set my alarm for 6. Didn't sleep much, but it wasn't worry keeping me up. It was the particular alertness of a man who's finally decided something and is just waiting on the sun. Saturday, 6:40 a.m. The house had that specific thick quiet that belongs to early mornings in somebody else's home. I carried the suitcase down the hall, with the wheels lifted so they wouldn't roll. Jenna's door was shut. Cole had already gone for his run. I'd heard the door click 40 minutes before. I set the suitcase in the entryway and went to the kitchen one last time. The note sat where I'd left it. The apron hung on its hook. The key was on the counter. Everything in order, the way I like things. I stood in the doorway a moment. Morning light came low through the window over the sink, caught the edge of the cutting board, the stack of prep bowls from the night before. The salmon was still curing in the fridge. 7 dishes half-started, waiting for hands that weren't going to be in that house anymore. I picked up my jacket. I walked to the door. I didn't look back. The drive to the hotel took 11 minutes. I checked in, rode up to the 3rd floor, set the suitcase on the rack, and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in 4 months, I sat in a room that was only mine, with no list and nobody needing anything from me. I breathed all the way down, the kind of breath you take when you finally notice how long you'd been holding the last one. I turned my phone off. That was enough for now. At 6 that evening, the cars started arriving. I wasn't there. but I know roughly how it looked. Porch light on, Jenna in the blue dress she'd been planning to wear since Tuesday, Cole at the door, in a blazer. Every bit the man arriving into the next chapter of his career. What I know for certain, because Roy told me the whole thing over breakfast the next morning, is that the kitchen was dark, no smell of salmon, no oven warming, just rinsed prep bowls stacked in the sink, and 7 dishes worth of raw ingredients waiting in the fridge for nobody. Jenna found the note. Then she found the apron. Then she stood in the kitchen for several minutes before calling the pizza place on Madison Avenue. Roy got there at 6:20 and knew the second he walked in. The house didn't smell like a party. It smelled like an ordinary Saturday. By 6:45, Cole was working the room with his usual ease, hand out for his new boss, a man named Russell Boyd, 50-something, silver at the temples, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to fill a room. He shook Cole's hand and looked around. Something smell good? Or is it still coming? Pizza, Cole said, smiling. Change of plans keeps it casual. Russell smiled politely, but his face was already saying something else. A few minutes later, he glanced around and asked, genuinely curious, Jenna mentioned her dad's been doing a lot of the cooking around here. He joining us tonight? Cole's smile held. He stepped out for the weekend, needed some time, already. He just moved in, didn't he? And he's traveling already. He's independent, comes and goes. I only ask, Russell said, because I was actually looking forward to meeting him. Roy was standing 6 feet away. He'd heard every word, and he'd spent Thursday afternoon in a diner booth, hearing the whole story firsthand. He set his glass down on the coffee table. Actually, he said, Walter left this morning. The little cluster of people near the fireplace went still. In that way, a room goes still when something true gets said out loud. Is everything all right? Russell asked. He's fine. Staying at a hotel nearby. Roy didn't raise his voice. Last night, Jenna told him he could either stay in the kitchen during the party or take the weekend somewhere else. He chose to leave. The room didn't gasp. It did something quieter. Worse, it absorbed it. Cole's jaw moved once. Jenna had crossed the room and was standing just outside the circle, very still. Roy spoke to Russell, simple, no performance. Walter's one of the finest men I know. I just didn't want the wrong version of tonight on the record. Nobody needed to say anything after that. Cole tried to recover. Roy, I appreciate you looking out for him, but this really isn't. It's all right, Russell said, calm in a way that costs nothing and lands with full weight anyway. We don't need to get into it tonight. He touched Cole once on the arm and turned back toward the bar. That was all. No confrontation. Just a hand on an arm, and something in the room rearranged itself for good. The party kept going in the technical sense. Pizza boxes on the island, paper plates, because nobody could find the good napkins in time. Russell stayed another half hour, mentioned his daughter's volleyball tournament, said goodnight to Cole with the exact same warmth he'd arrived with, which told Cole nothing and everything at once. By 9:30, the house was empty except for the two of them and Roy, who'd stayed to help stack pizza boxes. A small gesture that was also, Jenna understood, a kind of witness. When Roy finally left and the door shut, Jenna sat down on the kitchen stool. The counter where I'd spent 4 months of prep work was bare. The apron hung on its hook. She picked the note back up and read it again. I cooked because I loved you, not because I owed you. Cole stood in the hallway doorway. Neither of them said a word. My phone was still off when she started calling. I turned it back on Sunday morning, not because I'd resolved anything, just because it had been 24 hours and I figured Paige might be worrying. The screen lit up before it had even finished loading, a wall of notifications taking a second to organize themselves into meaning. 13 missed calls from Jenna, 2 from Cole, 3 from numbers I didn't recognize, 1 voicemail from Roy. Just wanted to make sure you're all right. You are. Call when you're ready. I lay in the hotel bed, listened to the air conditioner cycle on, and sat with what I actually felt. Not triumph. Not quite relief either. Something simpler. The particular quiet of a man who's done the hard right thing and is now living in the aftermath of it. I called Paige. She's been calling me too, she said before I could even ask. I told her you were safe and I wasn't giving her your address. She sounded scared? That's different from upset, Dad. The thing she's scared of isn't what she thinks it is. I asked what she meant. She's scared you're gone. She hasn't looked yet at why you left. Those aren't the same problem. That afternoon, Jenna finally got through to Paige. She'd cried, said she didn't understand how things had gotten to this point, said she needed Dad to come back, that she couldn't manage without him. Paige, who has never once sugarcoated anything in her 36 years, Told her, "That's the problem, Jenna. You've been managing with Dad, not with him. There's a difference, and he's the only one in that house who's felt it." 8 days. That's how long I stayed in the hotel before I moved into the apartment I signed for that Wednesday. 410 square feet, second floor, a kitchen window that looked out over a little courtyard with a bird feeder. Nobody had filled in a long while. I counted the missed calls Monday morning when I finally sat down with the phone. 31, 19 from Jenna, 4 from Cole, 6 from numbers that turned out to be mutual friends Jenna had apparently enlisted, and 2 from Roy, who'd also texted, simply, "That party was exactly as interesting as you'd expect. Call me when you're ready." I didn't call anyone back that first morning. I drove straight to the apartment complex, signed the lease, and the property manager, a no-nonsense woman named Carol Jean, handed me the keys with the professional kindness of someone who never asks about circumstances. I called Roy that afternoon. He told me about the party, the steady, factual way he tells everything, not to wound, just to bear witness. When he finished, I said, "You didn't have to say anything. You could have let it go." "I know," he said. "But that man was telling a story about you to people who didn't know better. I just gave them the other one." That evening I called Paige. "What's next for you?" she asked. "Signed the lease Thursday. Small place, but it's good. And there's a fly fishing club that meets at the reservoir Tuesday evenings." I looked it up. A pause, then she laughed, the real kind. "Good," she said. "Go catch something." The following Monday, Cole walked into the office, expecting a new chapter to begin clean. The promotion had gone through officially that week, the new title already on his email signature, the office with the window technically his as of the first. He'd planned that dinner specifically to introduce himself, in his own well-run house, to the people who mattered. Russell Boyd was in by 8:15. Cole passed him near the coffee station around 9. "Morning," Russell said. Same tone, different eye contact, shorter, the way a man's gaze shifts when an image he'd been holding gets quietly revised. They didn't go to lunch that day. They'd gone to lunch every Monday for 6 months. Cole mentioned it to Jenna that night. Russell's acting strange. She was at the table holding a mug with both hands, hadn't cooked, takeout still in the bag on the counter. "Strange how?" she said, no real inflection. "Distant, I don't know." He opened the fridge and stood in front of it like the answer might be inside. "It'll pass," he said. Jenna said nothing. A few days later, one of Cole's coworkers, a woman named Priya who genuinely liked Jenna, sent her a message. "Hey, you seemed off Saturday. Everything okay at home?" Jenna read it twice and didn't answer right away. The party had been meant to announce something. In the end it had, just not what Cole intended. Some things you can manage. The impression you leave in a room isn't always one of them. She found me on a Thursday afternoon. Paige had given her the hotel's name, not the room number. And Jenna had asked at the front desk, and the clerk had called up, and I'd said, "Send her up." We sat in the small lobby on the 3rd floor. Jenna was holding the note from the cutting board, the fold gone soft from being carried around for days. She sat across from me and didn't perform anything. No prepared speech. Just looked at me and said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I didn't answer right away. 31 years of running a dispatch floor taught me that the silence after an apology tells you more than the apology does. "What are you sorry for?" I asked. She took a breath. "I didn't see you. I saw what was useful about you being there, and I told myself that was the same thing." She went quieter. I think I was scared to look closer because if I did, I'd have had to look at some other things too. She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't need to. I'd watched my younger daughter for 35 years, and for the first time I understood with real clarity that what she'd done to me wasn't simple carelessness. She'd been managing her own fear for a long while, and I'd been one of the tools she used to do it. That didn't make it right. It made it human. "I love you, Jenna," I said. "That hasn't changed. But I won't live that way again. Not for anyone." She nodded. Her eyes were wet. She didn't argue. That too was something. The 31st call came Friday evening, 8:50, while I was sitting in the hotel chair with a book and a cold cup of coffee. When the name came up on the screen, I held the phone a moment before answering. It was Cole. Mr. Brennan. He'd never once called me that. 4 months in his house, and it had always been Walter, which I'd let go because correcting it would have meant a conversation neither of us wanted to have. He sounded strange, more formal than we'd ever been, and more honest. He didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. Men like Cole don't usually have that vocabulary loaded and ready. But he was quiet in a way I hadn't heard from him before, the silence of someone sitting with something he doesn't like. I didn't think it'd go like this, he finally said. I know, I said. Another pause. I thought about letting the call end there on the awkwardness of it, but there was something I wanted said, and the moment was open. Cole, I said. What matters to me most isn't what happened between you and me. It's that my daughter felt like she couldn't tell you the truth about something without it costing her. That's what I'd ask you to sit with. He didn't answer right away. Then the line clicked off. He didn't call back. I didn't expect him to. But I meant it, and the way you believe things you can't prove, I believed it had landed somewhere. Not because Cole was ready to hear it, but because certain things, once said plainly, don't fully go away. Paige flew in that Saturday. I picked her up from the airport at 10, that familiar face coming through the doors, sensible shoes, carry-on, the unhurried walk of someone who's seen enough real emergencies to know this wasn't one. She hugged me a long time, the way you hug someone when you want them to feel that it's solid, that it holds. We drove to the apartment, and she walked the whole 410 square feet with the thoroughness of a building inspector, running a hand along the counter, testing the window latch, looking down at the courtyard. Good light, she said. You could put a chair right there. We spent the afternoon at a second-hand furniture place on Madison. A table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf, a reading lamp. Paige kept trying to add things, a side table, a coat rack, and I kept saying no. I wanted only what I'd chosen myself, the way you fill a life you're actually living, instead of one you've inherited. At the hardware store, I stopped at a display by the entrance, a small set of hand tools on a pegboard, the same kind Donna used to keep hanging in our garage on Larchmont. I bought the set, mounted a strip of pegboard above the little work table I'd set up by the window. Not the same tools. Mine. That evening, Paige and I cooked together in my own small kitchen. Nothing fancy. A glass of wine, the window cracked to the October air, and I sat down at my own table, in my own chair, and ate like a man instead of a staff member. 3 weeks after the party, Jenna told me she'd started seeing a therapist. Said it carefully, like she'd practiced it. She's helping me understand some patterns, things I didn't realize I was doing. I was in my kitchen making coffee, looking out at the courtyard where I'd finally filled the bird feeder. I'm glad, I told her, and meant it without holding anything back. I don't know where things are going with Cole, she added. I don't know yet. You don't have to know yet, I said, a breath on her end. Dad, did you know before you left that it would turn out like this? I thought about it honestly. No, I said. I just knew I couldn't stay. She was quiet a second. I think that took more than I understood at the time. I watched a sparrow land on the feeder, dip its beak, fly off. It didn't feel like courage in the moment, I told her. It just felt like the last true thing left to do. The first Tuesday in November, I walked into the rec center by the reservoir at 6:25. The fly fishing club met in the back room that smelled like neoprene and coffee from the machine down the hall. 5 other retired men around a long table, fly-tying vises clamped down at intervals. The kind of easy quiet that comes from people focused on something with their hands. The man who ran it, a retired electrician named Hal, shook my hand at the door. Welcome. You said on the phone you'd done this before. Years ago, I said. Had to give it up for a while. Hal nodded. Then you already know the best part. What's that? The water doesn't care who you are out there. It just responds to how you work it. I sat down, pulled my chair in, picked up a hook and a spool of thread that had been waiting for me on the bench. I found the light, and I began. Not useful to anyone's schedule, not filling a role, not managing anybody's expectations. Just present, my hands on something real, my mind on the work in front of me. That was enough, more than enough. Looking back now, here's what I understand. I confused being needed with being loved. They can live in the same house, the same family, sometimes the same sentence. But they aren't the same thing, and when one takes the place of the other, what's left isn't love anymore. It's a transaction wearing the clothes of family. I spent 4 months cooking and cleaning and making myself small because I'd mixed up being useful with belonging. After Donna died, after the house on Larchmont went quiet, and 31 years of dispatch radios stopped needing me every morning, I mistook the weight of being depended on for the warmth of being wanted. It took an ultimatum, blunt as it was, to show me those two things had pulled apart a long time before I noticed. I don't regret going to Lakewood. I don't even regret those 4 months, not all the way. They taught me something I needed to know, that I still had it in me to walk out of a situation that wasn't right, that 61 isn't too old to take a life back. If you're somewhere that's been asking you to be smaller than you are, you don't have to make a speech about it. You don't have to win the argument. Sometimes you just pick up the suitcase, quiet and steady, and go. Before I let you go, I want to ask you something. Leave it in the comments. If you were standing where I was the night Jenna handed me that ultimatum, would you have stayed or would you have packed? There's no wrong answer, but I think whichever one comes to you first, without thinking it through, tells you something true.